abruptly interrupt our regular programming for a ramble about the new Miyazaki movie that some kind people had the pleasure of showing me in all of its Turkish camrib glory. For this reason, there will be no screenshots this episode, in part because the international premiere of this movie is much later, in part because, for better or worse, I respect you all, and I don't want to show you stuff that can be easily recreated by going to GIMP, filling the square black, and putting a blurry image of an anime in the top left corner of the screen. It also allows me to tackle the Japanese Disney man himself, which is perhaps one of the main reasons I agreed to this, and also because my employers paid me exactly $50. So, The Boy and the Heron is a 2-hour feature-length movie created by Studio Ghibli and directed by Hayao Miyazaki himself. The difference it has from pretty much any other Miyazaki production is that this one was finished in 2023. We follow the story of Mahito Maki during the Second World War. During it, his mother died in a mysterious fire, and so a year later, his father moves from Tokyo to the countryside along with his airplane components factory thingy. Like, seriously, it says in the wiki he makes ammo for them, but we only see the factory about 2 times, and one of those times it shows that they produce what looks like those glass panels for cockpits, but I digress. So, his father moves to the countryside, remarries mother's sister, and impregnates her. Mahito now has to live with her and her army of granny servants in an old European-style house. In the meanwhile, he engages with the time-honored traditions of the countryside, like bullying from local children, bashing himself with a rock for reasons the movie kinda doesn't really give, like he was in a fight and then he bashed himself with a rock, and getting harassed by a heron so much he decides to go and actively murder it. And in the usual way for these sorts of stories, the heron turns out to be a little gremlin person that at first acts like a dick to Mahito, but then takes him on a journey to a magical world of man-eating birds. Boy, does this film seem to have a grudge against the birds in their entirety. See, the problem with trying to retell any of Miyazaki movies is that a lot of the story you kinda have to piece together after several watches, which makes it the prime target for overthinking stuff. Like, for example, Wikipedia describes that Mahito, quote-unquote, endures a tense relationship with Natsuko, while in the movie itself, this tense relationship is him basically acting slightly passive-aggressive and not talking too much, a behavior that just as well can be ascribed to him being shy, or in an unfamiliar environment, or autistic, or for any other reason. This tense relationship can basically be summarized by this meme, and describing the more fantastical stuff of the movie sounds like ramblings of a madman. So, after his son, wife, and one of the grannies got spirited away, the rest of the grannies tell a sob story that fucking aliens are at fault of this, and once his ex-wife was gone in an abandoned tower for a year and returned just as good as when she left, so the husband does what every single good husband does, dons a gunto and goes on a search for his son. Meanwhile, Mahito and his mother, who is of the same age as him, dressed in a maid dress and loves him, are running away from an army of fascist man-eating parakeets, and they go to a door to the real world and hide behind it, and they see that his father is coming to them armed and with all the grannies he could think of, and his mother is like, "You can choose to leave if you want." And Mahito's like, "No, fuck that noise." And he tries to open the door to the magic dimension again, but the parakeets are waiting there, so they try to enter, and Mahito tries to close the door, but he can't due to the sheer mass of bodies on the other side. And meanwhile, his father sees that his son is getting molested by birds, and he charges the birds with his discount katana. But upon contacting with the real world, they turn into normal parakeets and shit all over him. And so he thinks his son turned into a bird. The moral I took from this scene was, father attacks a bunch of parrots with a katana, parrots shit all over him in retaliation. I, for one, support the parrots in this. And it all ends with allegories on that the children are better than adults and they can create a world without violence or bird fascism or any of that, and that it's better to live in the real world with kindness than in a fantasy world, and that Jesus loves you, and pretty much whatever else you can think of you can probably fit into this movie. If we're being serious for a moment here, this movie is quite obviously one of those movies that has more significance for the author and his fans than the rest of us plebs. Even without the wiki, just knowing the life story of the guy had me understanding exactly what he was trying to do here, and I can't say it's a bad thing necessarily. One Boy, One Heron is, at the end of the day, a Studio Ghibli production with everything that is both good and bad about it. Nothing in this story is revolutionary, but it doesn't need to be, and I assume neither do the core audience of these movies want it. You know, Miyazaki is a very interesting figure in the larger history of anime, and that he's a relic of a time long past. He and his works, to me, represent a time of late 40s to mid-50s, when the scars from the war were fresh, and the larger Japanese society was just waking up from the drunken stupor and trying to understand how to live after that party, and how many venereal diseases they've got from that Korean hooker. This spirit permeates in nearly all of his works, from the oldest to this new one. But the problem is that these times are long since gone, and many of the people who watch his works have at best witnessed them only from books. We do not live in a post-World War II world, we live in the world after 9/11, after a worldwide resurgence of the both radical left and the right, after Trump's election, after Biden's election, Brexit, the rise of ISIS, the Russian invasion of Georgia, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Japan of this time almost economically defeated USA once, suffered multiple economic crises, lived through some of the most loud and public terror attacks and assassinations, and now has to prepare itself for a future where the world order is uncertain and bleak. It is no wonder that his opinions are receiving backlash from nationalists of all sorts, but it is also no wonder that he adamantly refuses to change. This anime, being the typical Miyazaki work, is a reflection of that, a window into the worldview that is pretty to look and visually creative, but too naive to some, too pessimistic for others, ultimately foreign for everyone.